Oikos is the Greek word for house, Oikos, and it has a lot of usages and lots of variations of the term as you read through the Greek New Testament. I was reading through Ephesians 2:19 to 22, and in those 4 verses, there were 6 uses of the word or variation of the words. I'll try to read through those with giving you the idea of how that word is used, even though it might not make as good sense in English. But in verse 19 of Ephesians chapter 2, it says, "Therefore then, you are no longer strangers and sojourners." This is the word people who pass by the house. In other words, you don't really have a residence in the house. You're passing it by. So you're no longer strangers and, let's call it, sojourners, but you are fellow citizens of the saints and of the household of God. Now, this word household is a variation on oikos, which basically means members of the house, members of the household, or the sense that you belong there. So the first thing we had in 19 was you're not people who don't belong there. You are the people who belong in the house. Then when you go to verse 20, it says, you are house built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being chief cornerstone, in whom all the house building joined together increases into a holy temple in the Lord, in which also you, being house built together, become a dwelling place, a house to live in, of God in the Spirit. Wow. The variations just one after another, and it's basically talking about God wants to make his home with us. He's prepared a home for us, and he wants to make his home with us. It talks about us growing as unto a holy temple in the Lord. I've often talked about we might want to ask ourselves, are we really feeling at home with God? Sometimes when we feel comfortable, it's not necessarily a comfort that comes from doing holy things. Sometimes it might be a comfort that comes from not doing much at all or doing what we wanted to do. And so if we want to feel at home with God, we should also be living a life that pleases God, and then I think God would feel at home in us. It makes it very clear we have a place to live in God, and God has a plan to live in us. And so we need to feel at home with each other. And to feel at home with each other, he's given us the opportunity to live in holiness. Now, we know in this life it doesn't make us perfect, but it is true that we should live a life that pleases God. Holiness root is separated from that which is wrong. And so we need to live a life that is intentionally separate from the things that are wrong and intentionally focused on the things that are right, so that we can feel at home in God, being his house where he feels at home. Perhaps one of the most famous uses of oikos is in John chapter 14, verse 2, when Jesus says, "In my Father's house there are many," well, some translate mansions. In my Father's house is actually the word dwelling places, or places to stay. In my Father's house there are places to stay, but it's not just stay like a temporary stay. It's based on the word to remain. And when Jesus says, "In my Father's house there's places to remain," there is a final home, a final place, not just to stay, but to stay forever, to remain there forever. And so while we're in this life, seeking to have God feel at home in the way we live, and us feeling at home in living in God, there's eventually coming a time when we will be at our ultimate home. We'll be at the place where we will remain with God forever. There's a song written by Don Wurtzen, "Finally Home," that says, just think of stepping on shore and finding it heaven, of touching a hand and finding it God's, of breathing new air and finding it celestial, of waking up in glory and finding your home. Yeah, I think all the uses of the term home are to teach us we have a final home. And by coming to Jesus, knowing him, allowing him to cleanse us and save us, he's prepared us to go with him to heaven, where in his Father's house, there's places where we will remain with him forever. My thoughts for today. Thanks for listening.